Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. What if Naruto had a hidden talent of seducing? Movie. A duel of honor amongst the numerous factions of the warring clans era. An easy solution to a great deal of problems which allowed for the rise of warlords. Only the most powerful figures were able to rise to the top as it took duel after duel to establish a solid leadership. Whether it was based on terror or respect for such abilities, it mattered not. Alternatively, it provided the military of the competing factions a certain level of stability. If a conflict could be resolved in a one-on-one duel instead of an all-out battle where countless lives would certainly be lost, then it was naturally the best option. Benevolence at its finest, of course. Tell me, Hinata-sama, what does it take to hold a legitimate duel? A young boy soundlessly settled a tray on their table and served 2 cups of tea. Hinata murmured a faint thank you as he bowed before taking his leave. The tutor raised a cup to her lips, her thoughtful gaze never leaving Hinata's form. Despite the absence of white eyes, the lady's lineage was unquestionably Hyuga in the way she held herself. It was the lack of sound when she rested her cup on the table and the way she effortlessly commanded respect and attention when she spoke during meetings in a male-dominated clan like their own. She was the standard Hinata strived to emulate. Hinata forced her shoulders to relax at once and lifted her chin. First, both the challenger and the opponent must have some sort of formal combat training. At the lady's nod she continued more enthusiastically. And second, there must be at least 2 observers to verify the results and ensure there's no foul play. I suppose being a noble is an unofficial rule as well. That's right. Before the lady could add anything else she caught sight of Hinata's drifting gaze. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Hinata felt the telltale tingling on her face and withheld a sigh. She could only hope the red wouldn't be too notorious. I was just wondering, what's so important about a Kedo duel? Aren't they something more specific to samurai factions, rather than shinobi clans? The lady offered her a small smirk as she walked around the desk to arrive at Hinata's side. The element of surprise makes for unprepared targets. After a moment of silence, she sensed that an answer was expected. I suppose that's true, Hinata murmured. The lady's smirk widened and her eyes gleamed expectantly. Hinata suppressed a shiver as a chill ran down her spine and lowered her gaze to the still full teacup before her. She remained vaguely aware of the sudden unpleasantness in her stomach and regretted not skipping breakfast. Soleil-sensei, is this about Hanabi? You're not a half-wit, Hinata-sama, the Soleil said, her voice crawling down an octave. Being able to hold your own in the heat of battle is essential, yes, but talent on the battlefield will not save you from the treachery of the court and the council itself. Hinata's lips thinned and bunched her yukata in a fist, disregarding the urge to tap her fingers together. A deep breath. I'm already 10 and I'm not respected. I can't see that changing in the near future. Hanabi has a better chance than I do. Hanabi-sama is the second born. She will never garner the respect you could, was left unsaid. She shows no promise, they would murmur when her body hit the floor after a spar. It wasn't a lie, Hinata was well aware of the fact. And yet there was always someone who would extend a hand to help her up. In the back of mind, she wondered why they bothered, but in the end she could never fully articulate the thought. Why question it? She was happy and they were happy. It was a win-win in her books. A small smile reached her face. Thank you, Natsu-san. The older girl returned the smile and tugged her hand. Come, we have prepared something for you. It has been a long day, no? I can't complain, it could have been worse. Natsu laughed quietly as she gently pushed Hinata to the kitchen. We need to work on your venting, this can't be healthy. When Natsu left her on a stool by the island counter, she allowed herself to rest her forehead against the cool surface. It was long past lunch and the people working in the kitchen would surely disinfect it again for dinner, regardless of her presence or not. She closed her eyes behind the safety of her bangs and counted her breaths. In 4, hold 7, out 8. That day she didn't train with her father. While the fact that he was having a meeting with outsider guests soothed the stab of rejection, her exclusion from such meetings did not leave positive thoughts in her mind. If she remembered properly, he was talking to the head of the Uchiha clan. He probably did bring his sons along as an educational field trip of sorts. Sasuke was her classmate, not a stranger, and while his older brother was more of a stranger, it couldn't have been too bad. He seemed rather nice the few times they spoke. She might have done a good job as a host had she been allowed to take on the job. After months of ceding several duties to Hanabi, this would be the price she must pay. It was a less painful realization when she took into account Habai's bare forehead. It was worth the price of being cast aside by their father, she repeated to herself. It's not like the council would seal Hinata herself immediately either. As the firstborn, they had several reservations with the subject. Eventually the clank of porcelain against the countertop caught her attention and she raised her head to find Natsu setting down a bowl with soup and a glass of water before her. Hinata's eyes lit up as she took the offered silverware. Thank you, Natsu-san. It looks amazing. Natsu patted her head gently. The girls and I wanted to do something special for you. That was unnecessary, but I do appreciate it. It's not unnecessary, Hinata-sama. Natsu's countenance darkened and Hinata averted her gaze. You protecting us is no small thing. She shrugged stiffly. It's basic human decency. The council member's son had no business terrorizing all of you. Someone should have done something sooner. Natsu only offered a half-hearted smile this time. It looks like we also need to work on accepting compliments. Hinata only nodded as to avoid talking with food in her mouth. There was no use in arguing with Natsu once she set a goal, anyway. After a couple of minutes an apron-wearing girl entered the kitchen with hurried steps. It's time to serve Hiyashi-sama's guests, oh. Forgive me Hinata-sama. She offered a bow before scanning the countertop. Hasn't Natsu prepared your gift yet? Isn't a nice, warm meal gift enough? Hinata questioned kindly. I truly appreciate that you took the time to make it even when it's far past lunchtime. Her gift is still in the oven, Natsu huffed with faux indignation, as if I would forget the main dish. The other girl nodded her approval. We're going to serve the guests and we'll be right back to prepare your dessert. Don't you dare move from here without it. Hinata laughed, lifting a hand to cover her smile. Of course. Uchiha Fugaku took a sip of tea as Hiyashi spoke. 10 minutes later, he tapped the rim of his teacup 4 times and his youngest son started drinking the tea as well. Perhaps he was being overly mistrustful, but Itachi couldn't blame him. In fact, he appreciated the concern Fugaku had for Sasuke by testing everything they were given before allowing him to follow suit. While they went about it in different manners, Itachi was convinced that he and his father at least remained on the same page when it came to Sasuke's well-being, especially in an environment so unknown like the Hyuga compound. Their timeless neutrality made them the perfect enemy or the perfect ally if properly convinced. If they were to become allies in the face of the Grand Council, the one which governed Konoha alongside the Hokage, a level of appeasement could be reached. After all, the Hyuga and Uchiha clans together made up a not insignificant portion of Konoha's military force. When a branch cadet announced that a late lunch would soon be served for them, Itachi slipped away under the pretense of needing fresh air. A shinobi was one who endured, but who was he to waste an opportunity to truly enjoy fresh air and also reach his objective? Voices and steps beyond the next corner forced him to hide in the shadows. While he could probably get away with claiming that he was merely taking a walk, they would grow suspicious. If they were members of the main house, they would doubtlessly report their findings to Hiyashi. No need to risk antagonizing the clan while negotiations were still underway. I heard that Hinata-sama challenged Hisoka-san's eldest to a keto. Were you there for that? No, but Hitomi was, the other man said. Apparently the piece of shit Hisoka was harassing a couple of branch cadet girls and when Hinata-sama realized it, you know the rest. The shinobi hummed thoughtfully. But why would she challenge him? Wouldn't it have been easier if she went to Hiyashi-sama? I guess even Hinata-sama doubts the existence of his heart. That's tough. Yeah, but she probably planned the confrontation with the bastard before actually challenging him. Why do you say that? Why else would she challenge Hisoka herself? The man lowered his voice. No matter how disgusting he is, he's still a good shinobi. The odds of Hinata-sama winning were low and by complete coincidence, Tokuma, our best shinobi, happened to overhear that argument and volunteer himself as her champion. When the pair of voices diminished with distance, Itachi continued on his merry way and filed the information for revision. If the ever-growing mouth-watering aroma was any sign, then he was on the right path to the kitchens of the Hyuga compound. Across the terrace several cats rested on benches under the final rays of sun for the day. No matter how pristine the Hyuga clan portrayed itself, their love for the local cats of Konoha was evident in the amount of random food and water bowls littered across the compound. When he turned to a new hallway, a flock of Hyugas burst from a side door with trays in hand. The one at the front took a quick glance at him before tilting her head towards the neighboring hallway. Restrooms are over there, second door to your left, she said without skipping a beat. The rest of the group continued after her without sparing him a glance. Ah, thank you, well. That answered the question as to whether he would be in trouble or not. The Hyuga heiress' eyebrow twitched as she glanced around him. What she found or didn't find apparently disappointed her, judging by her downturned lips. Not enough to be rude, but just enough. Perhaps a little wary of a wandering outsider, though he couldn't blame her after the Hyuga affair. He vaguely wondered if she still remembered the incident. She was very young when that went down. Good evening, Itachi-sama. Good evening, he murmured as he scanned the kitchen. Nothing seemed to be out of place or out of the ordinary. The probability of foul play diminished, but the scale was far too evenly matched for his taste. It would only take the slightest bit of pressure to drive either the Uchiha clan or Konoha itself down the path of needless bloodshed, and he would be damned if he let it happen under his watch. Forgive the intrusion, Hinata-sama. I was just on a reconnaissance of sorts. A recon? Sasuke is rather picky when it comes to dessert, he said with a good-natured wince. While that didn't ease the suspicion on the girl's face, her illusion of curious detachment eased. That was good enough for now. We don't wish to offend your family, so I figured I could at least warn him about the desserts he may have to face later on. Ah, yes, she said, eyes lighting up with recognition. As Sasuke's classmate and frequent project partner, she must have been familiar with those habits. He never accepts chocolates from his admirers. Itachi hummed in agreement. It is a pity, as his actions are a waste of food which I would gladly take off his hands. A shadow of a smile reached Hinata's gaze and Itachi allowed himself a sigh. She didn't seem too suspicious. She trailed off, crushing traces of emerging amusement in her voice. That's rather unfortunate. I can't imagine avoiding dessert when I have it in front of me. Indeed. The heiress said nothing else and her discomfort returned in full force as her gaze wandered the kitchen. Possibly seeking another conversation topic, or perhaps it was her way of allowing him to do as he pleased in her compound. Perhaps if they were more familiar with each other he would have been able to tell and spare her the increasingly awkward atmosphere. Eventually she made the mistake of meeting his gaze once more and the image of Sasuke gagging at the dessert popped up in her mind. Her father would probably take offense to his favorite bean paste being disrespected in such a manner, no matter that Sasuke was 10 and an admittedly strange person who spent their childhood avoiding sweets. The beginning of a giggle pulled at her lips and her composure finally slipped when Itachi's knowing gaze turned to one of amusement. She covered her mouth as her shoulders trembled with laughter. I'm sorry, it really shouldn't be this funny, she said between several pauses. By the time she recovered, the heiress' shoulders finally eased and Itachi ventured to ask, "What brings you to the kitchen this evening?" "I'm waiting for my gift to finish baking." She gestured towards the oven. If he were a lesser shinobi, he might have sighed with dejection. Of course the heiress would be one who was going to receive those delightful pastries and not the guests. What a pity. It was only long hours that Soleil dedicated to etiquette and acting that stopped Hinata's jaw from dropping straight to the ground. The Uchiha clan was excellent with genjutsu, but she refused to believe that their heir would reduce himself to using his ability to amuse himself at her expense. Surely not. An unusually bright smile appeared on Sasuke's face, not a hint of surprise or laughter in his eyes, and Hinata thought that perhaps it was her who was losing her mind. Was it normal? "Ni-san, I thought you wouldn't be back until next week." Itachi glanced back and gave Sasuke a small smile before returning to stirring a boiling pot. That was definitely a frilly apron he was wearing. Definitely a soft pastel green that looked absolutely ridiculous combined with the face of a shinobi who, at 16 years of age, had a flea-on-sight warrant in most countries of the continent. That didn't happen just because. No setbacks happened this time. Any requests? "Can you make onigiri?" Itachi hummed his approval as he set down a wooden spoon in favor of pulling out rice. "How about you, Hinata-sama?" She knew her face was already set aflame. She shouldn't stare. And her eyes were still wide as saucers. She opened and closed her mouth a couple of times as no sound came out. Hinata settled for a hushed, "I'm okay, thank you." Sasuke took a seat and waved Hinata over. She silently joined him at the table and pulled out a book and a journal, ignoring the clear view of the Uchiha heir as he prepped the rice. He would not distract her from their project. He would not. But the face she saw in bingo books, stolen from enemy shinobi by her cousins, simply did not add up to the ruffled and ridiculously colored apron or the gentle expression on his face. It didn't match the ruthlessly efficient shinobi that the council and her father, don't think about it, wanted from her. In fact, He seemed so absurdly human, enjoying something as mundane as cooking that Hinata wanted to apologize for ever doubting it. Hanging from a hook on the wall, another pastel apron caught her sight. Purple. It seemed like something the Uchiha clan's matriarch would wear, and it made her think that the one Itachi was wearing was a gag gift of sorts. It was endearing. "We should try a full demonstration for our final project," Sasuke said, mindlessly scribbling notes on a journal. Hinata only offered a supportive nod as he continued his thought process. She needed to concentrate, and best to let him work out a general idea before adding her input. "I don't think this is something our classmates could pull off at our level. We could show them real shuri kenjutsu. No, we could choreograph a spar, loosely enough to fit in the demonstration but still keep our fighting styles intact. Knowing how to handle a kunai is fundamental, so we can both do that, and then you could use shuriken and I'll use senbon." "That could work. Ni-san, didn't you have a book about basic shuri kenjutsu techniques? There should be a couple of those in my bookshelf." Sasuke jumped to his feet, disappearing in a corridor, and without skipping a beat Itachi set down a pair of glasses on the table and returned to chopping tomatoes. Cubes of ice floated around her glass in a liquid that was somewhere between red and purple. Curiously, she took a sip, and before she knew it, half of it was gone. While she had partnered up with Sasuke on multiple occasions, it was never anything that required visits to each other's homes. The academy was weeding out the weak links of the student population, and it showed in the sudden difficulty of recent projects. She wouldn't mind more projects with Sasuke if she would be received with such a glorious drink every time. "What is this?" Hinata absently murmured. "Iced hibiscus tea." If she didn't know any better, she would say he sounded proud. Almost as an afterthought he added, "Mother grows them in her garden." Hinata gave the liquid an appreciative glance. Whoever came up with the recipe is brilliant. A proud smirk tugged at his lips as he glanced back at her and twirled a kitchen knife with his fingers. "You'll find that I'm very good with all sorts of culinary tricks." "Yeah." A voice huffed from the corridor. Moments later, Sasuke arrived with a stack of books and plopped them on the table. But the aunts hate it when he one-ups their recipes after tasting them just once. Itachi shrugged at this. "What's the point of working if not to enjoy the delights of life?" "That doesn't sound like a question." "Of course not, it's a statement, Sasuke." Hinata sniggered, hiding her smile behind a book. She truly wouldn't mind another project with Sasuke. "Good afternoon, Hinata-sama." He would never admit it out loud, but he's sure the tingle in his chest is one of disappointment as she does not jump with surprise. He even took care to not step on the dry leaves that littered the academy's patio. While he was not one to tease, a girl Sasuke's age shouldn't be as tense and anxious as this one was. Especially not if she was the daughter of his family's newest ally. "Good afternoon, Itachi-sama." When she turned around, veins were receding and a light smile crossed her face. "Are you looking for Sasuke-kun?" "It's a surprise," he said with a conspiratorial wink. Hinata glanced around them, only to find no one too close, before leaning in closer and gesturing for him to continue. "I heard your class had final exams today, and I suspect all of Sasuke's training and studying will prove fruitful. It's a special occasion, don't you think?" By then, Hinata seemed more amused than anything. "That's very kind of you, but I think he stayed back to talk with Iruka-sensei. At this rate he will certainly graduate top of the class next year. Proud as I am, his workaholic tendencies concern me." Itachi smiled wryly as Hinata scoffed as discreetly as possible. Perhaps the statement made him a hypocrite, but he stood by it. "How about you? I remember that your weapons demonstration project with Sasuke last year was a success." "I think I did well," Hinata said with a shrug. "Nothing grand like Sasuke, though." Itachi hummed thoughtfully. After a year of occasional conversation with Hinata and listening to the rumors of a soon-to-be deposed heiress, he knew enough to fill in the blanks. She was paving the way for a second-born to become the head of the Hyuga clan by proving herself incompetent. The stupid, but oh so noble gesture landed herself a permanent place in his heart. If anything, she needed a respite. "Why don't you join us?" "I couldn't intrude, he truly enjoys spending what little free time you have together," she said. "Anyway, I must get going. I am to continue my lessons with Soleil-sensei soon." Itachi's gaze darkened, though he offered her a polite smile. "I understand, perhaps another day." Fishy, fishy, Itachi vaguely wondered whether Hinata was aware of the implications of her words. While her actions screamed abdication, the actions of her father only served to solidify her station. No one but the line of succession should have any business with a woman like Soleil. The type that thrived in the backstabbing court of the capital of Hai no Kuni. There was something about Hinata that kept Soleil and Hiyashi as staunch supporters of hers, whether she liked it or not. Hinata nodded before offering a small bow. As she approached the gates of the academy, she turned back around. "Oh, and Itachi-sama." He tilted his head. "My head maid wanted me to tell you to stop trying to steal her secret cinnamon roll recipe." He crossed his arms with a raised eyebrow. "I'm being accused of thievery?" "Don't shoot the messenger, Itachi-sama." Amusement returned to Hinata's gaze and traces of a grin reached her lips. "But if you must know, yes, potential thievery." "Well, I am shocked and appalled. Natsu doesn't appreciate your attempts at recreating her recipe." Itachi tutted and flicked her bangs. "Everyone is allowed to bake in Konoha, no matter how similar the end products may appear." Hinata raised an eyebrow. "Don't give me that look, you and I know that you appreciate my efforts." "I do not," she scoffed. "Then who was it that taste tested all of the prototype cinnamon rolls, A cough. "That was Shisui-san, if I recall, and you." "Ni-san. I thought today was your day off." Itachi's hand retracted from the door's handle as he glanced back. Sticky notes and scrolls littered the living room floor, and at the center of the chaos, between Sasuke and Hinata, a board covered with several pressed plants rested. The final project before graduation. Knowing them, there was no way that they would end their stint in the academy with a mere board of poisonous plants. There was a certain sense of pride for Sasuke's accomplishment and even Hinata's, but the accompanying pit in his stomach put a damper on it. He should be happy for them. It was the start of a new stage in their lives. Instead, he gave the pair a wry smile. "There is no such thing as a day off, I'm afraid." Sasuke rolled his eyes. "Business meeting. You two know that most Uchihas outside the shinobi force maintain our textile industry." He wanted to laugh when they nodded in perfect synchrony. It would be nice if they could end up in the same genin team. Hinata carefully set down her brush, away from the board. "The Uchiha clan supplies Konoha with flak jackets and uniforms, right?" Sasuke nodded as he pressed one of the plants against the poster. "Yeah, the retired shinobi and everyone else who doesn't want to become a shinobi usually take care of that business, or they do paperwork for the police." "Exactly." Itachi leaned down to ruffle Sasuke's hair. Hinata snickered when Sasuke failed to get away from his grip. "Haven't you considered learning the trade, Sasuke? We are going to expand the family business soon." "Expand the family business? How do you feel about civilian fashion, little brother?" Sasuke raised an eyebrow and Itachi refused to elaborate any further. "You'll see if you come with me. You're welcome to join us, Hinata-sama." Sasuke glanced at Hinata, who offered an equally puzzled look. The bewilderment did not leave his semblance even when he found himself being led to a tea house by Itachi. "It is about time you learn how to handle these types of meetings," he claimed. Sasuke snorted. If anything, Itachi wanted to have a field day watching him figure out how civilian fashion of all things would be helpful to the clan's finances. Hinata sighed. The upside of partnering up with her most brilliant classmate was the guarantee of an excellent score and by extension, the guarantee of a good team when the time came, but the downside, his brilliance stemmed from sheer stubbornness. It was his perfectionism and refusal to leave an issue without a solution. "Why civilian fashion?" Sasuke muttered to himself. She was half tempted to wave a hand before his eyes as he continued his monologue. Instead, she grabbed the back of his shirt before he ran into Itachi and steered him to a clear path. "It's a waste of money that could go to the police or the production of uniforms. Who in their right mind would risk the well-being of a stable business that sustains so many Uchiha families?" "I can see some benefits," Hinata offered. Sasuke raised a disbelieving eyebrow. "Having a business that's not dependent on shinobi makes your family more stable in case Konoha goes through hard times." "If our family wants to cater to the whims of Konoha's civilians, there's an issue." At Hinata's questioning tilt he continued. "The Grand Council will look down on us even more if we have to appeal to the civilian representatives in there." Itachi feigned surprise. "You know what the Grand Council is?" It took everything in Hinata to make her amusement as least apparent as possible. Sasuke glared at his brother, offended. "Duh, I actually pay attention in class. The Grand Council is the group of old people that control the village along with the Hokage." "That's a colorful way to put it." Itachi cracked a smirk. "You do realize that our father and Hinata-sama's father are part of the Grand Council?" Sasuke coughed. I said most of them are old, not all of them. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. Itachi hummed, full of suspicion. I'm very sure that is not the case. Before Sasuke could retort, Hinata picked up the previous conversation. The back and forth would never end without a change of subject. What's wrong with getting civilian approval? Sasuke's concerns are understandable because to some it may indeed appear like a desperate and perhaps suspicious measure, Itachi explained. Our clan has been accused of treachery for 12 years and many people in the Grand Council believe it. Enough to force us out of the heart of Konoha and to the Uchiha district. Hinata offered them a humorless smile. She was familiar with the rumors, but she refused to believe that her father would accept an alliance with traitors. He trusted them and so did she. I can understand why you would seek more allies outside that council, Hinata murmured. You have my family's support, Hokage-sama's support, and the local civilian population appreciates the military police's service. Will this new business perhaps cater to civilian nobility? Itachi glanced at her as he forced his semblance to reflect nonchalance. Activated or not, the Byakugan was capable of discerning even the slightest of movements. Why do you say civilian nobility? The Uchiha clan already has support within the village even with the divisions in the Grand Council. Hinata went quiet for a moment, but Itachi did not miss the gears turning in her head. For a moment he was reminded of the rumors regarding Hinata and a disgraced son of her clan's inner council. She set him up for humiliation after he disrespected her maids, they said. The next most powerful group that could vouch for your loyalty would be the daimyo's court. They're far from Konoha's rumor mill and doesn't the daimyo's personal guard have an Uchiha? He could vouch for you. Sasuke glanced at Itachi for confirmation or denial of Hinata's theory. Instead he found Itachi carefully concealing any emotion and his gaze distant. Either Hinata was completely right or so horribly wrong that his manners-obsessed brother was unable to say anything. Your mind is in the clouds, Hinata-sama.
Forgive me, she murmured. The clock in the corner ticked but Soleil did not return to the lecture and instead poured tea into both of their cups. It won't happen again.
Hinata's back ached as she held her back straight. The temptation of resting her back against the chair was overpowered only by Soleil's sharp look. Pretend there is a kitten right behind you, Hinata-sama. You don't want to squish it, do you? Soleil started saying that when she was 3, recently presented to the world as Hiishi's heiress. A noblewoman does not slouch. Hinata's hands screamed at her to release the teacup when her fingers curled around the warm surface. It wasn't scalding. She would need ointment for her hands. She went overboard while training. Hopefully she wouldn't stain the lovely porcelain with blood again. What has you so distracted, Hinata-sama? Her face tingled and Hinata forced herself to not avert her gaze in shame. It is of no importance, I was thinking about the Uchiha clan and Shimura-san. That is old news, Soleil said unimpressed. You may need to find a new set of ears in the Grand Council if that's the type of information you're getting. Hinata laughed. Inuzuka Hana was hardly an information broker, much less a spy for her. It was mere gossip. I have no need for ears in the Grand Council. I was only wondering if Shimura-san is the reason the Uchiha clan is taking precautions. Soleil hummed with interest. What makes you think they are doing so? They are setting up a subdivision of their textile industry aimed at civilian nobility, Hinata said, shaking away the sense of guilt and betrayal. It was irrational. Itachi invited her, an outsider, to the meeting with the investors along with Sasuke, so clearly it wasn't something he wished to keep under wraps. Very soon it would become public knowledge. I think they're aiming to have a foothold in the capital and I find it rather tragic that they have deemed necessary to have outside support. The Uchiha clan are not traitors. Hiashi-sama would never form an alliance with traitors, she sniffed. I trained him better than that. Shimura-san's stance regarding the Uchiha clan is disgraceful. It was him who pushed for them to be relocated from the heart of Konoha to the Uchiha district. But why? Hinata murmured. It made sense in a vague way, but not enough to warrant the extent of discrimination the Uchiha clan faced. It was only natural for them to take steps to protect themselves. They are the only thriving founding clan of Konoha. If anything, their influence should eclipse Shimura-san's. He believes they are responsible for the attack of the Kyuubi and the death of the Yondaime Hokage, Soleil said simply. The Uchiha clan suffers because he has convinced many that his conspiracy theories are true. Something inside Hinata twisted. Is there evidence to back up his claim? Only vague connections. Hinata silently nodded, hoping for her to continue the tale. Most people scrambled to fill in the silence when she ran out of conversation, and while Soleil would never scramble, perhaps she would see merit in sharing information with her. Soleil looked pensive for what seemed like an eternity, and she lowered her voice and leaned towards Hinata. The Sharingan indeed possesses the ability to control beasts like the Kyuubi, but it is a completely different matter to accuse the Uchiha clan of such treachery without further evidence. There were so many holes in that theory, Hinata couldn't help but allow her eyes to widen. The most obvious of the holes: the Uchiha clan does not keep as tight a track of the Sharingan as we do with the Byakugan. Soleil hummed her approval and offered her a smirk. Now, that is classified information, and I trust you to be tactful. I was starting to believe that I would die of old age before I saw any interest in politics from you. I do not keep track of the ongoing affairs of any council, Hinata defended weakly the following morning. She should have kept her mouth shut. Curse the curiosity Itachi ignited with that field trip. It's mere gossip. The older woman raised an eyebrow, and Hinata bit the inside of her cheek to avoid squirming in place. After a moment, Soleil's smile widened and Hinata braced herself. That lady smiling was never good news. You sure talk plenty about Uchiha affairs to feign nonchalance anymore. While I wouldn't suggest a union with them, you must go for the eldest of the brothers if you do. As an afterthought, she added, it will look better when you stake your claim over clan leadership. Hinata just knew her face was set aflame. She should have known better than to inquire about that family with the political-minded Soleil. I wasn't thinking about that, neither of those things. Do not fret, it is only natural for you to prefer the younger one since he is your age, but in a few years you'll see the older one as a fine young man as well. You're just saying this to punish me for not doing my duty, Hinata scoffed without any bite. I see that now. The creases around Soleil's eyes crinkled, amused and unapologetic. Forgive an old lady from wishing to teach you a valuable lesson. We need to work on concealing your thoughts before you graduate from the academy next week. I would rather train and increase my odds of survival. I'll have no part in the Grand Council, after all. Of course not. Right now your place is in the Minor Council, Soleil said airily. Back to the lesson. Care to remind me what that is? Hinata bit back a scoff. Her tutor was not done being petty. You taught me this when I was 5, she wanted to say. In response, Soleil would probably question the rest of her basics. The heirs of current members of the Grand Council deal with small local issues such as the Academy's curriculum and budget, as well as the state and maintenance of public property. You speak as if you were an outsider, Soleil mused. Hinata's already tense shoulders stiffened when she caught the sharp glint in the woman's gaze. Hinata's steely hushed voice left no room for interpretation. I will not participate in the Minor Council, Soleil-sensei. That place belongs to Hanabi. You cannot shirk your responsibilities just because you dislike the way our clan works. A warning. Deep in her mind, the 3-year-old heiress, newly presented as such, screamed at her to take the olive branch she extended. Soleil was not acting without Hiashi's leave, she never would. It wasn't too late to take up the mantle of her birthright. It wasn't too late to make her father proud. Simultaneously, the image of Hanabi's wide admiring gaze being replaced with Neji's hateful eyes crossed her mind. A chill ran down her spine and she knew her answer. Hanabi was born to lead the clan. Wrong answer. Soleil's playfulness was completely snuffed when she finished her sentence. Hinata's hands clenched the teacup that continued to burn the wounds under the wrapped bandages, and blood silently dripped from the porcelain to the cedar table. For a moment Hinata was tempted to retract what felt like a finality. As the heiress, and eventually head of clan, Hinata could protect Hanabi even if she was branded, but that was the coward's way out. Hanabi would not pay the price of her cowardice. By the time the sun was no longer visible and the meeting was long over, Itachi contemplated the reflection of the moon in the Uchiha district's lake. While very similar to Hinata's Byakugan, she did not have the frostiness of the moon, nor did she appear to be as isolated. Certainly not if the rumors about her setting up a councilman's cruel son with the help of Hyuga Tokuma were true. While Itachi never ventured to axe, he had the inkling that it truly was a setup. Whether it was orchestrated by Tokuma or Hinata herself was up for debate, but her deduction earlier that week made him conclude that it was Hinata's idea. While she rarely pulled moves like that one, she loved her supporters enough to put down a threat to them. She was shrewd enough to take into consideration her lack of experience on the field and use a respected champion as her proxy for the Keto. It would be perfectly normal for her or Sasuke to realize that he was aiming for the nobility's attention. The jump to nobility from the capital was very different. It wasn't a tactic used by any current member of the Grand Council because while the daimyo was respected as the descendant of a deity, Konoha was too autonomous for capital influence to hold much weight under most circumstances. It simply was not the type of deduction a person could make with as limited information as Hinata had when she reached the correct conclusion. If she ever decided to enter the political arena with the solemnity that her status carried, she could become a figure to be wary of. Alliance or not, she was not obligated to blindly back him up. Would she approve of upping the graduation age requirement? Would she feel comfortable enough to delegate important jobs to his family in spite of the rumors? She was friendly with him and Sasuke, but who knew what things others whispered in her ears? You look like the auntie used salt instead of sugar for your desserts. Itachi scoffed. That was a terribly executed prank. I think it was brilliant. Of course you do, he muttered, shaking away the phantom taste. It was a massive breach in trust to mess with someone else's sugar. How did your mission go? Of course it went well, he mimicked Itachi's formal syntax. Now, what's on your mind, and don't say it's nothing. You'll end up like Sasuke one of these days, obsessing over a topic that eludes you. Itachi glanced at Shisui before returning his gaze to the reflection of the moon. I was thinking about Hinata-sama. I may understand why Hiyashi-sama refuses to disinherit her. Shisui whistled to himself before turning to Itachi. Rather than an easygoing expression, Shisui wore a seriousness that could only be the start of a joke at Itachi's expense or the prelude of a grave conversion. You know that I'm all for your happiness, right? Itachi silently nodded, wondering in which direction the seemingly irrelevant comment would take the conversation. While I'd usually support your endeavors, don't you think that Hinata-chan is a little too young for you? Don't be ridiculous. Itachi shot him a withering stare as he cackled, taking a seat beside him on the dock. I would never try such a thing. Between fits of laughter Shisui continued his barrage of questions. Then what's this about her not being disinherited? I have always thought it strange that Hinata-sama has not been disinherited in spite of her laissez-faire stance in both Hyuga and Konoha affairs. She has a place in the minor council and yet she never showed up to the induction ceremony. The minor council, Shisui hummed to himself before snapping his fingers. Ah, isn't that where the heirs of majors' clans are placed, to discuss stuff? We take care of minor local issues. Why does it matter? It matters, Itachi muttered, because she is a quick thinker. Hiyashi-sama won't depose her, not due to favoritism, but rather, she is his best shot at abolishing their hierarchy. Shisui glanced at Itachi and followed his gaze to the surface of the lake. It was said that the Byakugan was a gift from the moon and that the Sharingan derived from the Byakugan. Hinata-chan is a good kid, she won't become a threat to us. I never said that. You were thinking about it. Itachi sighed. She is Sasuke's friend, but if she ever plays an active role in any council, I want Hinata-sama to be on our side. Shisui felt the vague sense of wanting to slap a hand to his face. For someone so brilliant, it was apparently incredibly difficult for Itachi to acknowledge the true issue, which wasn't an issue, at hand. So, to summarize this whole dilemma, you feel unsettled about the sudden revelation of her political savviness. Itachi only offered a non-committal hum. The kid was raised to lead a noble clan, just like you. I'd be surprised if she wasn't well educated in those matters. The issue here is your reluctance to address her as a potential threat. Would it be wrong of me to continue offering my friendship? Itachi murmured. She has been a good friend to Sasuke, without ulterior motives, and I would be repaying her transparency by seeking her favor if she could ever offer it. Then tell Hinata-chan you want her to throw her title in your favor, he said, waving a hand nonchalantly. Offer to return the favor. Naruto was dense. He was also very aware of the fact. It didn't take a genius to figure out that only 2 bells meant that only 2 out of the 3 of them would actually ascend to Genin. His gaze trailed to Sasuke and Hinata. They stood close together and the distance between them and him felt more prominent than it probably was. Naruto caught Sasuke's soft murmur, urging Hinata to shed her jacket for the sake of speed and stealth. You're wearing mesh armor under it, aren't you? Rose tinted Hinata's face, but she ended up complying as the Jonin explained the exercise. Sasuke quickly snatched the jacket from her hands and threw it towards their bags on the ground. She wordlessly pouted and gave the jacket one last glance. A lump formed in his throat and if it weren't for his empty stomach, Naruto was sure he would have felt nauseous. All of a sudden, Hinata seemed a little more menacing. He never really talked with the quiet girl, but her usually dreamy eyes were sharpened with concentration, and indeed she wore mesh armor under the jacket. She looked prepared. Something told Naruto she would pose as much of a threat as Sasuke to his dream. As Iruka announced the composition of Team 7, a masked shinobi appeared beside him and passed a note before poofing away. Without notice, it was no longer him, Sasuke and Sakura, but rather him, Sasuke and Hinata. Both him and the cotton candy-haired girl protested, but Iruka didn't budge. It was a mistake, Iruka said apologetically. He truly was sorry, Naruto could tell, but nothing would convince him to return to the original composition. This was a mistake, Naruto failed to argue, and now he was stuck with those two. They would team up and dump him in the academy. It was the rookie of the year and the top student in taijutsu against him. Both of them hailed from fancy clans with special techniques. Iruka had said as much one time, even if the memory was dulled with the blur of drowsiness. Sleeping during history was bliss. Iruka's Hitai felt light as a feather on his forehead, and Naruto concentrated on the soft texture of the fabric on his skin. They would not take it from him. He would make Iruka proud, they'll see. Without a second thought, Naruto launched himself against the silver-haired Jonin, whatever his name was. The man tutted and stopped him with a single hand. Both Sasuke and Hinata's eyes widened a bit. It was slightly comforting to know that even they felt threatened. I wasn't done talking. Naruto groaned and fell back. We get it. Snatch a bell before noon or return to the academy, yada yada. The Jonin's bored gaze shifted into amusement. You came at me with the intent to kill. Keep that up, because otherwise, none of you will get close to taking a bell. Sasuke and Hinata shared a glance just before the Jonin gave the signal. They were definitely going to work together. In a matter of seconds the pair disappeared into the foliage. Only Naruto remained in the open, and the man raised an eyebrow. Naruto huffed and lifted his chin. I'm ready for a one-on-one. If his Kage Bunshin no Jutsu could handle the likes of Mizuki and Konohamaru's instructor, it could handle this man. Absolutely. That's not how it's supposed to go, the Jonin said, exasperated. Naruto grinned. He caught him off guard with that move. It was his first step forward. It took less than a minute for him to realize he was outmatched. Naruto steadied himself under the surface of the lake and rubbed his bottom. Who knew that being poked could be so painful? He narrowed his eyes as he swam towards the surface. It wasn't over. Sasuke rolled his eyes as he watched Naruto soar across the field and land in the water. Only that clown would be foolish enough to attempt to go against a Jonin without a plan. Hinata joined him on the branch where he hid and offered him a jar. Dip all of your kunai and shuriken in this. Poison? Hinata nodded. He is much more experienced than us. Maybe we'll have a chance if his health isn't at its best. Sasuke smirked as he dipped his weapons. Naruto was still arguing with the Jonin and giving them time to prepare. At least the idiot was useful for something, he mused. I knew doing that project on poisons with you was a good idea. Iruka-sensei got mad at us, though. Hinata deflated at the thought. The usually mild-mannered instructor was truly upset that day. We messed up. Sasuke scoffed. It's not our fault that our classmates have weak systems. We did them a favor when we included poison resistance in our demonstration. We landed half of them in the hospital. And now they're immune to at least one of the variety of poisons we showed them. We made them harder to kill, they should be thankful. Hinata shook her head and gave up. By now Sasuke was aware that his lack of empathy was both amusing and horrifying to her, but his words did hold some truth. In the end, they successfully met the Academy's graduation requirements, and now all that was left was to meet the Jonin instructor's requirements. The 2 slots of the team would be his and Hinata's. He would make sure of it. Hinata's hands curled around the handle of a poisoned kunai and nudged Sasuke's side with her elbow. He followed her gaze to the lake where Naruto was thrown. Nothing. Perhaps she was looking in a completely different direction than the one she was facing. The veins surrounding her eyes suggested it was a possibility. Several clones jumped out of the water and Sasuke's eyes widened. So that was what had shocked her. Naruto, who couldn't produce a single successful clone yesterday, had created a ridiculous amount of clones. Not illusions, actual clones. Hinata's grip on the kunai tightened when the clones successfully overwhelmed the Jonin. That was their chance. Let's go, he hissed. Naruto, in all his recklessness, created an opening for them, and Sasuke was not one to waste an opportunity. Blades flew from the foliage and Kakashi twisted out of Naruto's grip, kicking one of the Narutos into the air. The real Naruto, was it? Waved his arms in an attempt to break his fall. Hinata launched herself in the air and caught him bridal style, sliding a few feet on the grass. Her landing disturbed the ground and dust flew around. Sasuke waved off the dust with a smirk. One of their kunai had managed to graze Kakashi's arm. Just barely, but it was enough. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly as he jumped to his feet. What a gentleman, Hinata. She only offered a nod and a small smile, though her gaze remained fixed on Kakashi. The book he mocked Naruto with earlier returned to his pocket, and his visible eye gleamed with renewed interest as the three closed in on him. What a curious development, he murmured. Even if you team up, there are only 2 bells. What do you mean to achieve? Naruto glanced at the other 2 competitors before narrowing his eyes. I'll handle them later. First I'll beat you and take my bell. Unimpressed, Kakashi glanced at Hinata and Sasuke. You 2 could successfully hide from a seasoned genin, he said. Hinata's eyes widened and her shoulders jumped when he stared directly at her, but she never abandoned her defensive stance. Perhaps a novice chunin as well, but keeping your Byakugan activated is the same as having a beacon on your head. You need to learn how to regulate your chakra without sacrificing your visual advantage. Hinata bowed her head, though not enough to create weaknesses in her stance. Thank you for the advice. A smile threatened to slip from Kakashi. It was rare to find such a polite person these days, especially in the middle of combat. A true Hyuga, minus the arrogance. The base of every Hyuga tends to be taijutsu. How good is yours? Hinata stumbled slightly as she sidestepped a kick. She quickly regained her balance and grazed his leg with a palm before he could pull away. Kakashi ignored the electrifying tingle in his leg. She really was not pulling her punches. Sasuke jumped between them as she took a step back and threw another barrage of blades. One came a little too close to cutting the bells from him, and Kakashi was forced to move away. Naruto and his clones awaited him with an impatient gleam in their eyes. Without missing a beat, several clones launched themselves at his feet where they held him in iron grips. Above Kakashi, another Naruto flew at him. The flying Naruto toppled the group over and another reached for the bells. Sasuke clicked his tongue and approached the mess with Hinata close behind. The second Naruto's fingers touched a bell. Kakashi disappeared in a puff of smoke. Sasuke scowled and warily lowered his stance as he scanned the clearing. Beside him, Hinata's gaze sharply turned to one of the clones. Imposter. Hinata bolted to the false Naruto and swept a leg under him. He jumped and avoided the fall gracefully, in a move unlike Naruto. Sasuke zeroed on his new target and Naruto dispelled the rest of the clones as he joined the other boy. Once again, Hinata pulled back and Sasuke jumped in the fray, but this time she remained within fighting range. Kakashi held his forearms to his face, blocking kicks from Sasuke. Simultaneously, Hinata snaked her hands to the bells. She only managed to graze them with her fingertips, but that was enough for Kakashi to put distance between them. Kakashi pensively took a look at the 3 children surrounding him. Sasuke was proficient at both long range and melee. Hinata favored melee combat, as expected, but her throwing skills were not bad for a close-range fighter. Together they formed a competent duo. Naruto, on the other hand, his taijutsu was not particularly noteworthy and he had no plan when he deployed waves of clones. Despite this, he was smart enough to join forces with Sasuke and Hinata. It wasn't the team he was looking for, but the spirit was there. Kakashi clicked his tongue and the clanging of metal against metal echoed in the clearing. He kicked Hinata away from him and grabbed the back of Naruto's jumpsuit, flinging him to Sasuke and toppling both of them over. Naruto stared at seemingly nothing as he hit the ground and Hinata felt an ache in her chest. While she wouldn't mind being sent back to the academy, Naruto was serious about a career as a shinobi. So was Sasuke. They both deserved better and nothing could erase her shame as she laid on the ground, unable to change their fates. At last, Kakashi spoke. That was close. Sasuke clenched his fists and turned his head to the side. You're mocking us. I'm giving you a second chance. Kakashi gave them a calculated smile that comforted no one. You don't get those very often in the shinobi world, you know. Thanks.